Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Asaf Ramarowski. I am the Executive Director of SPME and ASMEA, and it is my pleasure to once again welcome you to our SPME ASMEA webinar show. This afternoon, we have the privilege and opportunity to talk to Brandy Shufutinsky. Brandy is the newly appointed Director of FDD's Program on Education and National Security. Prior to that, she was a Director of Education for Community Engagement for the North American Values Institute, aka NAVI, and she'll be talking about really a topic that I think is critical for all of us to tackle and to understand. That is the anti-Semitism in the K through 12 sector. All of us who are regulars on our show know that we focus a great deal on higher education. But all of us are also not naive to believe that this starts at higher education. There are the origins of all of this starting in K through 12. And Brandy has been doing a great deal of work and research on her team in trying to understand the national security aspects, the origins of the charities, the ideologies that play into all of this. So there is much to discuss. Format-wise, Brandy will talk for about 25 minutes to 30 minutes or so. Then we'll go into Q&A as always. If you have questions, and we encourage as many as possible, please type them in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to all of them today. If we don't, I apologize in advance, and we'll do our best to respond after the show. So really, without further ado, Brandy, thank you for joining us, and the virtual floor is now yours.
Thank you, Asaf. Thanks for having me and for this invitation to speak about this really important topic that I know a lot of people have been focused on and concerned about. I'm going to share my screen to go over share a couple of slides. Give me 1 second. Let's see. All right. Let's see. Can you see?
Yes. Go ahead.
Fine. All right, great. Thank you. So when we consider anti-Semitism in K through 12 education, excuse me, we should consider three things: where teachers get their curriculum from, what pedagogy they use to teach, and what's taught in teacher training. Zen Education Program or Project is a very commonly used resource in K through 12 schools for history and social studies curriculum all across the country. They're a commonly used resource, and their about statement is, and let me get it and read it. The Zen Education Project promotes and supports the teaching of people's history in classrooms across the country. The Zen Education Project is coordinated by two nonprofit organizations, Rethinking Schools and Teaching for Change, that have spent decades developing and providing social justice research for teachers. So Stanford professor of education, Sam Weinberg, has been called one of Zen's harshest and most influential critics. Professor Weinberg's critique can be summed up in the following words. He views Zen's history as dogmatic with undue certainty. And this is a quote I'll read to you from Professor Weinberg. Largely invisible to the casual reader are the moves and strategies Zen uses to tie evidence to conclusion, to convince readers that his interpretations are right. So when we look at Zen, when we look at the lessons that are used by thousands of teachers across the United States, we should consider whether they're actually teaching history or whether they're teaching opinion. This lesson, Teaching Palestine, Israel from the perspective of civil rights and Black Power activists, frames a topic in a way that it's full of assumptions. So these assumptions in this lesson are presented as fact. Another lesson developed by Zen is titled Whose Terrorism, which starts with the following statement. Shortly after the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, President George W. Bush announced these as acts of war and proclaimed a war on terrorism. But what exactly was to be the target of this war, and what precisely did the president mean by terrorism? Despite uttering the words terror, terrorist, or terrorism 32 times in his September 20th speech to the nation, he never defined terrorism. Rethinking Schools also offers Teaching the Seeds of Violence in Palestine, Israel. Again, these lessons are offered for free to thousands of teachers using them in K-12 classrooms. And this quote that you see on above the Who's Terrorism lesson is actually from one of the classroom teachers that used this lesson. And she states, "My students are always amazed at how many of these situations actually involve the United States as the perpetrator of things that they deem to be terrorism." Another vector of anti-Semitism includes lessons created by teachers that use information sourced from social media. This clip was part of some ethnic studies classes, and it was created by TRT World, which is a Turkish media company. And for those who don't know, Turkey isn't exactly friendly to Israel.
Palestine went from this to this, and it didn't happen overnight. Up until the early 1900s, Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire, a religiously diverse land where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived alongside each other. Then, things begin to change, with the start of the Zionist movement in Europe calling for the establishment of an independent Jewish state, ideally in Palestine. The first wave of European Jews start to immigrate. By the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire collapses and Palestine is under British rule. It's 1917. Britain declares its support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The number of Jewish settlers grow, fueling tensions between the Arabs and the Jews. The violence between the two sides caused Britain to bow out and let the UN take over. The UN approves of a plan to split Palestine into two states: Jewish Israel, Arab Palestine. The city of Jerusalem, which is sacred to Muslims, Christians, and Jews, is now a UN-controlled international zone. Jews accept the UN partition plan and declare independence as the State of Israel, but neighboring Arab countries object to the land takeover. This marks the beginning of the First Arab-Israeli War. Israel is victorious and makes a grab for the land intended for the Palestinian state under the UN. The land gets divided into three parts. Jordan occupies the West Bank and East Jerusalem, Egypt occupies Gaza, and the State of Israel takes 78% of historic Palestine, including West Jerusalem. 700,000 Palestinians become refugees as a result, and the day is remembered as Al-Nakba, the catastrophe. It's 1967. The Six-Day War breaks out between Israel and neighboring Arab countries, and by the end of it, the map looks something like this. Palestine is now fully occupied by Israel. Despite the absence of a formal peace treaty, things start simmering down. Then Israelis start settling into Gaza and the West Bank, resulting in an Israeli-Palestinian struggle that gives rise to the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Their main goal? To liberate Palestine from Israel by any means necessary. Fighting goes on for years. The PLO eventually accepts dividing the land between Palestine and Israel, but the conflict doesn't end there. More settlers make their way into Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories. The international community considers this illegal. The frustration of the Palestinians leads to an intifada. As a result, Hamas is born, a political movement determined to fight against Israeli occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The United States, Israel, and the PLO signed the Oslo Agreement to split the West Bank into three sections. Area A, under full Palestinian control. Area B, under joint Palestinian-Israeli control. And Area C, under full Israeli control. But the solution creates a problem. Area C contains the majority of West Bank's agricultural land, water, and minerals. Palestinians have limited access to these. Further peace talks prove unsuccessful. Palestinians lose hope, resulting in the Second Intifada, and Israel begins building walls and setting checkpoints to control Palestinian movement. It's 2005. Israel withdraws from Gaza, but continues settlements in the West Bank. Hamas gains power in Gaza and splits from the Palestinian Authority, seeing it as being too secular. The West Bank and Gaza are now under separate leadership. Israel imposes a blockade restricting any form of movement by land, air, or sea. It's 2017, and this is the current situation of Palestine. There are solutions on the table, but will we see them implemented in our lifetime?
So many community-based organizations work directly with school districts to provide teacher training and to develop curriculum. This example is from an organization called Comrades Education. And you could see some of the co-sponsors: Jewish Voice for Peace, Surge, Catalyst Project, etc. But when you look at the session topics and the teacher lineup, we can see how some of the lessons, all of these lessons, actually are rooted and embedded in anti-Jewish bigotry. You can also see some of the usual suspects and who the guest teachers and teachers are. So now let's consider pedagogy. The four themes that I most commonly see include decolonization, settler colonialism, critical theory, and scholar activism. Decolonization, when used as a teaching pedagogy, falsely paints Jewish people as invaders in the land where their ancestors come from. It falsely depicts Palestinian Arabs as the indigenous people to the land and therefore justified in their actions towards Jewish people. This includes the justification of violence as a form of resistance. Settler colonialism is similar to the decolonization pedagogy. Both depict the United States. In this graphic, it's United States is referred to as Turtle Island. Both depict the United States and Israel as settler colonies where invading people oppress indigenous people. This ideology holds that the very identity of being a settler colony justifies these countries being decolonized, and decolonized by any means necessary is justified. So this is where the excuses for violence, the excuses for the violence that we witnessed on October 7th, 2023 comes into the classroom. Students are taught a false history of a people in a country. This false history is taught through a lens that not only excuses violence, but sees it as a legitimate form of resistance. So a few years back, there was a lot of talk about the debate about critical race theory and CRT. So some people wanted CRT bans. Other people were denying that CRT is even taught in K-12 schools. And I don't want to revisit that debate here. But I do want to discuss how critical theory can fuel anti-Jewish bigotry in K-12 education. Critical theory depends on the oppression binary, which holds that those who have real or perceived success can only achieve that success through the exploitation of others. So, for example, when discussing ideas about white privilege, critical theory holds that those who benefit from white privilege do so because of racism against non-white folks. Now, I could spend a lot of time on that, but I don't want to here today. The point that I want to get to instead is something that's not as widely discussed, and that's the real or perceived part. In the United States and in other places, but for the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to stick to the United States. Jewish people achieve above the mean on average. So for being such a small minority, American Jews are overrepresented in certain fields, certain spaces of success: medicine, law, science, business, etc. But if one believes the foundations of critical theory, which holds that one can only achieve success through the exploitation of others, then it makes sense that those same people conclude that American Jews have ill-gotten success. And this is foundational in a lot of curricula, even though there are many people that have denied it, including in the whole ethnic studies debate that was taking place and is still taking place in California over the past few years. And the last point that I want to cover is the move away from scholarship and towards this idea of scholar activism. None of these are new concepts, and in fact, this one may actually be one of the oldest, the idea that education is inherently political. And we could look at points in history, for example, when Black Americans were denied not only basic humanity, but the right to acquire knowledge. Learning and teaching were indeed political or activist acts. Fast forward to now, though, and let's consider whether we want all learning and teaching to be done through a scholar activist lens. Do we want kids learning that their school days should be spent in learning ways how to dismantle and disrupt, or do we want kids to be provided with basic knowledge so that they can achieve success and grow into happy, successful citizens? Woke Kindergarten's an organization that has unfortunately provided learning materials to K-12 schools all across the country in multiple states. I'll listen to what one of the comrades has to say about Israel.
Yes, everyone, the rumors are true. I am anti-Israel. I am pro-Palestine. And I am 100% 10 toes down anti-Israel. I believe Israel has no right to exist. I believe the United States has no right to exist. I believe every settler colony who has committed genocide against native peoples, against indigenous people, has no right to exist. I believe in a free Palestine, from the river to the sea. I believe one day Palestine will be free. Is this news to anybody? Did I just throw some bars at you and not even do it on purpose? Because when your work is poetry, that's what happens. Keep coming for me. Keep coming for me. These people keep coming for me. I am pro-humanity.
So Woke Kindergarten kind of emerged on the public stage a couple of years ago when Hayward Unified School District hired them. I believe they paid $250,000 for a 3-year contract for Woke Kindergarten to come in and provide teaching directly with kids. You can see the graphic with the kids as comrades, that there's this push to start teaching children to be activists from the very youngest ages all the way through high school. The other graphic is an example of another organization, the Coalition for Liberated Ethnic Studies, which recruited middle and high school students to participate in all of the protests against Israel this was in 2023 during the beginning of the war against Hamas. So I want to look a little bit at teacher training. Scholar activism overlaps between what I just showed you, what's done directly in the K-12 classroom, and then the scholar activism that occurs at the university level from the halls of academia. So academics from the University of California campuses have held multiple people's tribunals since the October 7th terrorist attack. And you can see from this graphic that these tribunals are meant to hold certain UC leadership accountable for the war against Hamas. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here, but there are a couple of important things to consider. What kind of campus climate do you think this creates, holding these types of teachers, these types of people's tribunals? And where have we seen it before? So we think about what happened during the Chinese Revolution when the Chinese Communist Party held people's tribunals, and what were the desired outcomes there, and what do we think they are here? And lastly, and not because I went to USC, but let's look at UCLA and their Center X. On its own, this wouldn't be troubling, but it coupled with everything else that we've discussed and went over today, it's concerning that their first guiding principle is to embody a social justice agenda, which again brings me back to the question, what's the desired outcome of these teacher training centers? Are teachers being taught to teach kids how to improve literacy and numeracy and to learn history, foundational knowledge of our democratic republic, or are they being taught a social justice agenda, which may very well be some of the things that we saw before, and based on the research that I've done, and I don't know many others have done, that seems to be the case, where the first principle, guiding principle, the mission, the values of a lot of our teacher training programs are to promote a social justice agenda, and there really isn't a definition of what that means. So what we do is we look into what social justice means to these individuals and organizations, and we see that it means things like decolonization or pushing back against settler colonialism or teaching children to be scholar activists. So I'll stop sharing here and see if we want to have more discussion.
Great, thank you for all of that, and for the thorough, illustration of a lot of these problems. I have many questions, and I'm sure Alex is as well. Alex, I'm gonna also add you here to all this. But let me start off by asking a first question. I mean, I think that is worthwhile. In contrast to some of the debates that we're seeing also on the campuses. Is there any kind of standard at the K through 12 level when it comes to anti-Semitism? There's a big debate, obviously, on the college campuses regarding the IRA definition. We're seeing problems. So from a legal standpoint, from what you're seeing, is there any kind of standard that we can start holding these institutions accountable for, like we're attempting to do with higher education, as far as what's in our toolbox in that regard as well? So. Well, start with that one.
Okay, start with the easy one. No, I'm not an attorney, so I can't give and won't give, pretend that I could give legal advice, but I will say there are a couple of points that we should probably clarify when it comes to the K-12 space. First of all, what we hear in higher ed is this idea of academic freedom, academic freedom. That those policies related to academic freedom don't apply to K through 12 schools, because in K through 12, we're dealing with minors. So teachers actually don't have academic freedom to teach in a manner that doesn't abide by certain policies. So there are policies related to not necessarily specifically anti-Semitism, but civil rights and discrimination. We have those policies and laws in place. The real issue is that they're not being enforced, and the ideologies that I just went over don't allow Jews to be included in those protections is according to a lot of the activists. And a couple of examples that I can give, or I'll give one specific example. There were two professors, believe from Stanford, their psychology department, that were experiencing anti-Jewish discrimination. They went to their DEI office, which was supposed to be, I believe, the first step in reporting anything related to discrimination and bigotry. And the DEI official said that DEI is not for you. It's not for Jews, because Jews aren't minorities, or because Jews aren't privileged, or aren't oppressed, or because Jews are privileged. So part of the problem is that people don't understand what anti-Semitism is. A lot of people don't understand that civil rights protections apply to all of us, not just quote unquote peoples of color or the oppressed. Civil rights are for every American. And then the other part is, without that knowledge, then how can we expect enforcement? So the IRA definition gives a framework of what anti-Semitism is, so people can maybe better understand it, so they can recognize when it occurs and then address it when it happens. But without the enforcement piece, the definition's only a definition, just like any other law or policy. A law is only as good as its enforcement.
Great, thank you. Alex, give you the next question before we go to the audience.
Sure. A great presentation, very thought-provoking, very depressing, obviously. Here's my question. The writer Abigail Schreier wrote something last year, I think, about this issue broadly. Let's call it, broadly speaking, teaching Palestine. And her thesis was that the American K through 12 profession switched to villainizing Israel and, in effect, victimizing Jews, as a transition away from the emphasis on transgender issues that had very much been an obsession, suffused the profession for a number of years, until attention was paid and the jig, in a sense, was up. And I'm wondering whether you agree with this observation or thesis that she has.
It's an interesting observation. However, I don't think that the whole idea of villainizing Jews and taking the side of Palestinian Arabs replaced the gender ideology, because it still seems to be pretty alive and well in the K through 12 space. I think what we're seeing is that there's this kind of piling on of all of these levels, all of these groups that are deemed oppressed, where they're being lionized as they're the groups that if you're a moral or just person, you have to side with, regardless of anyone else, or regardless of any other facts presented or any other experiences had. Certain people that are put in this category of oppressed are deemed worthy of standing up for, and those that aren't in that group are deemed worthy of being resisted.
Right. Right. My thesis, having spent all too many years in this space, this benighted space, is that the K through 12 profession in particular is at a place now where it uses this issue in particular, Israel, as the paramount question of all time, as a distraction from its own failures. American K through 12 education does a terrible job, by and large. It spends an extraordinary amount of money. And if we simply measure by test scores, it does a lousy job. And I don't know, would you agree that that there's a kind of politics of distraction, or that it's engaged in?
I think that that could be part of it. I don't think that that's all of it. I do think that there are a lot of ideologically driven forces that really have bought into the oppression binary. And
Mhm.
so maybe Israel's the distraction today, and the gender identity issue was the distraction months ago, and there will be something else. I'm sure Iran will be the distraction in the coming months or weeks, something else. But at the core, I think the issue is that there are certain
True
people.
believers.
Right. That they're the true believers in the ideology that certain people are more worthy than what is the Animal Farm quote? We're all equal, but some of us are more equal than others. I mean, it really was it right? I'm messing it up, but that in itself, that is the ideology. And if you accept that ideology, it makes sense for all of these other things to follow.
Okay, I have many more questions,
We'll
but
come back,
let's
Alex.
go on and get some
Well,
from the
let's
listener.
go to the audience here, and then we'll come back, and we can always continue this. Let me try to pair some of these questions together related to some of the similar themes here, Brandy. So, Jill Blair was asking about, the role of the unions and allowing to promote support and turning pedagogy into activism. Also to kind of, partner with that, one aspect of that, is also, another audience member, David Gruber, is asking about, how much the local Board of Education is responsible for these K through 12. So if you kind of want to tackle about the administration and these outside forces, regarding the accountability and transparency that plays into all this.
So start with unions first. If we're looking at unions, I think we have to dissect what the role of say a teachers union is. So many people would assume the role of a teachers union is to make sure that teachers are being provided safe, healthy working conditions, the resources and tools necessary to carry out their profession, earning a fair wage, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Teachers unions seem to have taken on a whole host of other social issues as their cause du jour. And that's where you see the politicizing of this organization, to where its raison d'être is no longer to make sure that teachers have what they need. And also, I think it also should be cleared up that teachers unions, the students aren't at the center of what a teachers union is standing up for. A teachers union is supposed to stand up again for the worker, which is the teacher, not the student. So to think that a teachers union would have the student's best interest in mind is a little bit misguided. And then also we see teachers unions becoming increasingly involved in politics. I mean, they raise a whole lot of money and they lobby for particular elected officials and very specific policies. So they've been engaged, very engaged in activism for a number of years. And that chips away at any type of standards for learning, because again, if they were focused on obviously safe and healthy working conditions for the teacher and making sure teachers have the resources necessary to do their job, then they would be more focused on the academic side. You would want to make sure that teachers actually get the training to identify kids who have learning struggles, or identify kids who are advanced in something, or the teachers are getting those types of teacher training, professional development opportunities. But we're seeing instead unions push activist related to even teacher professional development. So I think that that's how unions are negatively impacting, from my opinion, the K through 12 education system. And we're looking at administration. So some school boards are elected, some are appointed. Many members of school boards, they decide to join the school board for a specific interest. They're not necessarily education professionals. A lot of them are very well intentioned. They just don't know that when they sign a contract with, say, a community-based organization that has a different agenda, that agenda is to the detriment of the learning environment for students. And so, I mean, that's why there are a lot of groups, Navi is one of them, that is encouraging community members and parents to get more involved in school boards.
Right. And obviously, here in my backyard in Lower Merion, there was a whole big to-do and contested, political debate with the last board of elections and whatnot. So just sharpen that point a little bit as far as unpacking, kind of, distangling this kind of Gordian knots that we're dealing with here at large. I mean, how much power does, as far as influence do these boards have on the pedagogy? I mean, so when you talk about, what do they actually have and can they do? You get on the board, great. What are the tools you have to actually influence when it comes to what's happening in the classroom?
So this is where there isn't a short and easy answer because it's different for every school board. Some school boards have more power to influence actually what curricula is brought into the district. Some of them have a director of curriculum at the school district level who is the person that approves, say, outside contracts, who approves teacher professional development. A lot of school boards are a little bit limited. Maybe the state has a little bit more power on what actually comes in, but it is the school board's responsibility to make sure civil rights laws and policies are being managed correctly, to make sure that if there's an issue, it's being handled. If there's a teacher that's being discriminated against, or if there's a teacher that's doing the discriminating, then it is the administration's responsibility to actually address that situation.
Great. Going over to a next question here. I mean, again, apropos of your comment about the training, in higher education, in contrast, we've seen a lot of a lot of these places have contracted a lot of outside providers to come in. We see it also in K through 12 as well. Are there certain companies, and we saw it obviously, with DEI and the weaponizing in the school boards in New York State in particular. Are there certain companies that are also responsible for when it comes to this kind of debate about the Middle East, and the question, this Palestine exceptionalism that, can be looked at as far as their materials? And, I will take it one step further, given what we all look at as far, are there certain academics who are, like we saw in California, who are impacting from the universities directly onto the K through 12, that should be singled out, and looking at where the flow of material is coming in to populate, a lot of these schools?
Yes, there are, and we've actually seen it again. It came out, maybe was it roughly a month ago, a couple weeks back, the Choices program that was housed at Brown University. So it was taught in how many hundreds of schools, the Choices program. It was revealed that that program was developed by, I believe, Qatari money, housed at Brown University. Brown University, I believe, severed ties with that program, but we don't know how many school districts are still using that program. So yes, there are outside community-based organizations, some of them associated with universities, some of them pretty open about their anti-Israel, anti-Semitism, and they have a direct line into a lot of K through 12 schools. We see it with, my challenge to people who've joined us is, if you see an issue at your local K through 12 school district, look and see if they're partnering with any of the surrounding universities for anything, for teacher training. Where do most of the teachers come who are doing their student teaching? Are they coming from a particular university? Is the local university offering curriculum development for free? This is where we've seen a lot of the issues or the crossover from higher ed to the local K through 12 school district. And in a state like California, where now there's a mandate for a particular subject, we're seeing it a lot more. So since ethnic studies is now the graduation requirement, all of these universities, the UCs, the Cal States, and there are dozens of campuses, have ethnic studies departments or critical race and ethnic studies departments that are providing micro-credentialing and teacher professional development and curriculum development for the local K through 12 school districts.
And parents,
And at least UC Santa Cruz, which has one of the key critical race and programs, and the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism, which is one of the key new anti-Zionist institutions, you might say. They have curriculums that they've developed, which they shop to individual school districts. And there have been a number of cases in Northern California, the Bay Area, where, you know, it's actually potentially a moneymaker for them, but they create the curriculum, then they advocate for it. They come and testify before the school board. They organize the community in order to promote their own product. It's a circular process that's quite sinister, even though the amounts of money are not necessarily extraordinary, but they're ideologues and they want to get it in any which way.
Right. And besides the money they're able to make that way, and it's good that you brought up UC Santa Cruz, because the local school district there is Pajaro Valley Unified School District, which is, I mean, it's just a hotbed of Jew hatred there. And the school board meetings are disruptive. And if you look at who's attending there, we see some of the professors from UC Santa Cruz's critical race and ethnic studies departments leading the charge at the K through 12 school district. They don't have kids in the district. They're there promoting their product, but it's also ensuring that their university department stays in existence, because look, now it's a jobs program.
Right.
and parenthetically, I mean, we saw the whole situation with, apropos your connection about the community outreach. Obviously, the question of, Title VI centers, which again, part of the mandate of Title VI centers is to do community outreach. So depending on what neighborhood you're in, and if there is a school, and if your local school happens to be a Title VI, then they're coming out with community outreach and bringing in, the trickling down the bias from, higher ed directly into the K through 12. Which is again as far as looking at how federal dollars are being spent, as far as the transparency and accountability there.
Exactly.
Okay, we'll go to our friend and colleague Suzanne, who's asking, what are the challenges or benefits when it comes to rising success of school choice movements in states like Florida and Texas for combating anti-Semitism and anti-Israelism in K through 12?
That's a good question, and it's a common one I hear often. I think that school choice for combating isn't the remedy for combating anti-Semitism. I think school choice can be a remedy for other issues in the K through 12 school system. Power of teachers unions, for one. It really hits that they're power base for that. But as far as combating anti-Semitism, if teacher professional development programs, say teachers in Texas still have to go through a teacher training program in order to earn their credential. Well, if all of those programs are still steeped with this ideology, they're still kids that have chosen a school will still be in a classroom with a teacher that maybe pushing an anti-Jewish perspective in the classroom. So I think that it's not the fix all for this problem. I think it can address some other problems. And a really great indicator of that is looking at those states. So looking at Texas, for all the great things about, the state of Texas, they have a problem in their education system with anti-Semitism. It hasn't disappeared there because of school choice. And the same goes for Florida, because there's still state level requirements for teacher training and credentialing, and the places that those teachers are coming from are steep in this ideology. And I just want to point out that doesn't mean that every teacher is coming out and they're, just this terrible anti-Semite. A lot of them are completely unaware that they've been sitting in a learning environment that is putting this type of material and ideology and like normalizing the foundations of this type of Jew hatred. A lot of them don't understand that the oppression binary can easily lead to the stereotyping and biasing against Jewish people. So even teachers with the best intentions, well, if they're sitting in that stew of that ideology, they can come out thinking that they're doing great things for their students, but unfortunately, they could be contributing to the problem of anti-Semitism.
Great, thank you.
In this respect, it's worth mentioning the problems that go on in elite private schools as well. I mean, it's a kind of analogous situation where the teachers, some teachers, are unreservedly anti-Israel and anti-Jewish. We had the problem in the New York area at the Fieldston School, which is one of the fanciest private schools in America, and in other cities as well. And the Quaker schools, Friends schools throughout the country, particularly in the Philadelphia area, in Eastern Pennsylvania, where the dynamics are a little bit different because many of the teachers there have some kind of relationship with the Quaker tradition or claim to. But these problems are not exclusive to public schools by any means, and in Jewish schools too.
Right.
Here and there, a little less prevalent, fortunately.
But
I
Alex,
mean-
it is worth mentioning, and Brandy, maybe you want to comment about that, apropos, and we've written and done a lot of deep dives into all of this, but the Quaker education system, I mean, again, the current the current CEO of the American Friends Service Committee is a former superintendent of the Quaker schools in Ramallah. And so the Ramallah Quaker School, which is one of the oldest Quaker schools, in the Middle East, is a feeder to the Quaker schools here in Pennsylvania. And so the whole kind of ecosystem as it relates to information coming into the Quaker school system, and there were a bunch of debacles at Friends Central, at Germantown Friends, and a few others directly correlated with all of that. And again, it seems to be, and apropos to Alex's point, obviously we also see anecdotally, I guess, a lot of misinformation or a lot of naivete that, Quaker values or Jewish values. There are a lot of Jewish families who send their kids to Quaker schools, which again, adds to and amplifies the problem because their social justice has become a religiosity.
Exactly. And I mean, I can speak to this from personal experience. My kids spent a few years at Quaker schools, and we actually took them out and decided not to re-enroll them during COVID, but also after the 2021 war against Hamas, because of their version of social justice is just fundamentally anti-Jewish.
Yeah, we got problems. No shortage of problems to tackle here. Alex, I'll go back to you for the next question.
I want to ask about something, a newer strand of the problem, and that's the concept of anti-Palestinian racism that's become uh, uh, central. It's part of official government policy in the Toronto public school systems as a part of sort of a nested concept of racisms that go from racism generally to Islamophobia, and at the core, and rhetorically, it's always presented this way, anti-Palestinian racism, which explicitly declares it to be racist to contradict Palestinian narratives like the Nakba, and other Palestinian concepts. And I'm wondering how you're seeing that playing out in Canada, where it seems to be more developed, but also especially in the US.
Right. Unfortunately, it's crossed over our northern border, and it's here alive and well in many K-12 districts and also in higher education. So my former colleague and friend, Dr. Mika Hackner, has been tracking this from the beginning. So is David Bernstein. Actually, when we were on a call many months ago with some Jewish Canadian folks, and they were talking about it, and we were like, oh, how long do you give it, a week or two before we see it here? And I mean, it was under 2 weeks before we started seeing it pop up in school district meetings here. It's not just that it holds that APR holds that if you disagree with the Palestinian narrative, you're committing anti-Palestinian racism. It holds that if you agree with history and historical fact, you're committing anti-Palestinian racism. And this is important, I think, if we're talking about education spaces. When denying Jewish indigeneity to the land of Israel is fundamental to being anti-Palestinian racism. The idea is, if you hold if Zionists believe Zionism is part of Jewish identity, the belief that Israel is the land of the Jewish people, it's where the Jewish people came from, it's where the language came from, it's where the spiritual practices came from. Just believing those historical facts, that's committing anti-Palestinian racism. So fundamentally, it's accepting APR as truth means that you have to deny fact. And that's where it becomes problematic in the education space. And I have said this many times to many different people, probably to their great annoyance. What happens when we get to the point where the truth doesn't matter? And I think we're there. And I think we're seeing the results of that there's a level of chaos where historical fact doesn't matter, where narratives are more important than experiences or the truth. That it's this twisting of words that has led us to this place that actually, again, chips away at scholarship and academic knowledge, and it leans really heavy on the activism side.
So
Alex?
what's the future for obviously a big maybe I'll reframe that into more concrete terms. We always talk about what we can do, but one of the things that I always like to say is that our problems are a subset of broader problems within various kinds of spaces and institutions, not least of which, in this case, K through 12 education, which is in a state. So it's not really an issue of simply going to fight with your school board, but more where do we see the future of K through 12 education most broadly going in this country, where facts don't matter, where history is racist, historical facts are racist, where feelings matter and nothing else does.
I think that we have to start with the first question being, what is it that we expect K through 12 education to do? What do we expect it to give to students? What rights do kids have to actually acquire knowledge in the 12 or 13 years if they are required to go to kindergarten? What do we expect? What right do they have? What rights do they have? They're forced to sit in these classrooms for 12 or 13 years of their lives. What rights go along with that responsibility? And then look, is the system set up to achieve the goals? Is the system set up to meet those rights and responsibilities? I think that we have to kind of get back to the fundamental question: what's the purpose of our education system? If the purpose in the wide American community accepts that the purpose of our K through 12 system is to, graduate activists that know how to dismantle the cis heteropatriarchy, okay, then it makes sense that this is what teachers are teaching, and these are the community orgs that are coming into the classroom and providing lesson plans and curriculum development. But if the goal is to graduate citizens who can participate actively and hopefully productively in our wider society, then we need to look at doing something differently. And maybe the doing something differently is something that we've done in the past. Maybe we need to bring in some newer ways of teaching and learning. And we see some schools doing that. We see a lot of classical schools popping up, a lot over the past few years, especially since COVID, from K through 12 to even university programs. And there's a reason for that, because they're able to provide a certain level of foundational knowledge that will graduate a citizen.
So a segue to that, going back to, the larger issue as far as becoming citizens and, supporting the country, United States, democracies and whatnot, you also deal with the national security aspects of all of this. And so, now we're seeing, obviously, and we know ample amount of evidence vis-a-vis Qatar, who is buying K through 12 education. And so their end game is obviously to basically turn America on its head, like they're doing with higher education. You're building the foundation at the K through 12 level. They're continuing with that all the way into higher education, getting jobs, and going, and their modality of citizenship is very different than the old school. So, of what citizenship should be like when we're educating towards, our value system. So, what can be done when it comes to cracking down on the incitement that we're seeing now with, like we're dealing with higher education, as far as, the kind of groups and charities, FARA, when it comes to foreign money being invested in American schools. What tools are, you and your team are working on as far as exposing some of that, that we can also have impact at the local level and at the federal level?
I mean, first knowing what's going on. So knowing, are foreign actors actually influencing education? Are they giving money? Are they giving curriculum? Are they providing teacher training? What's the level of foreign influence in your K through 12 school district? And the other part is being able to measure what the negative ramifications are of that foreign influence. And so if you have a foreign actor, and I'm giving a complete hypothetical, but if you have a foreign actor that's looking to degrade our education system so that the results are similar to kind of what we're seeing now, only a third of kids are roughly are functionally literate and numerate. So our education system's been degraded because maybe there's a foreign actor that's encouraging a lot of the social justice type of materials in the classroom and a lot less of the academic scholarship in the classroom. What's the end result of that? What's going to happen if only roughly a third of our population is functionally illiterate and numerate? Well, that would make us vassals. We would be dependent on other people for all types of things, whether that's being able to fix my car, change my oil, because the mechanics and the science of that, or whether that's somebody who has the right level of mathematical skill so they can build sturdy bridges across our country, or whether that's somebody that actually knows how to diagnose if somebody's ill in the hospital. That would make the vast majority of the American population dependent, where they're not citizens anymore, they're subjects. And I think that we have to take seriously what happens when our education is degraded to the level where majority of kids that are graduating high school, majority of them don't have the basics of literacy and numeracy.
Great, thank you. Taking another question from the audience here, related to, Deborah Bernick is asking about how do we handle the maps, as far as that are being produced, she's pointing out correctly, that, it's hard for parents to explain the complex history, as far as, understanding the maps itself. Is there, again, this goes back to our materials, and some of the stuff that you were showing in the PowerPoint. But maps are critical. I mean, and if maps are distorted, and if map creates their own narrative, where, what's the way to, to handle or tackle, some of the biases in the maps and in the textbooks?
I think with facts, I mean, this isn't an easy lift. Most people are working overworked, and we are depending on our K through 12 schools to provide our kids with this level of knowledge. So it's not like most people go to work 8, 9, 10, 11 hours a day and come home and they're going to teach their kids for another 3 or 4 hours a day. But it does require us knowing what's going on in our kids' schools and being as involved as we can. Sometimes that involvement is, I'm going to write a check or help you paint campaign signs for someone else running for school board. Sometimes the involvement is going to be running for school board and getting in the positions where you can make policy decisions. Sometimes the responsibility of us is going to be that I'm going to make sure that whoever I vote for in the voting booth has our children's best interest at heart, regardless of what political party they belong to. Like making sure that we're putting certain things, prioritizing certain things, which I don't think we've seen historically. There's been a lot of complacency because life's been pretty good. I really do think since October 7th, more people are aware that a lot of us weren't paying as close attention as maybe we should have. Our adversaries were, and now we have to make up time and space as best as possible.
Right. Alex, I'm going to give you the last question, given where we are at the time. So to so we can, unfortunately, we're going to have to continue this for no doubt, but I'll let you take the last question here.
My last question, I guess I could go broad or go narrow. Teacher training and accreditation. Well, those of us who are familiar with the condition of ed schools in the States as essentially hotbeds of scholar activism, which attract these people and produce them, and then with some kind of certification, pedagogical skills unknown, but ideological fervor guaranteed. Do we have to rethink that whole component of the equation, and what would substitute for it? I mean, my theory has always been go back in time and kill John Dewey, the creator of this sort of progressive education movement. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Yes, we do have to rethink it. I think that part of the problem is we do need to have a certain level of standardization, and there is something that teacher education programs can and should be providing as far as classroom management, time management, how to write out a curriculum, how to grade, how to, how to identify again a kid who has a learning challenge or who is maybe advanced or gifted. But I think fundamentally what's happening at least in the higher ed level, when you're looking at departments of education or schools of education at the university level, are they meeting the bar of what it is they're funded to do and to provide? And if they're not, then maybe that's where we talk about, well, should they still be funded? Should they still be accredited? Anything that's accredited has to meet a standard. So we need to look at what is the standard for schools of education as far as accreditation, so that they're graduating teachers that can teach. And maybe those things need to be looked at a little bit more closely, given the results we're seeing, and the results are abysmal. We're failing.
Is that a responsibility of at the end of the day of the federal government?
For universities, yes. And the state government, if you're talking about a state school system. I mean, many state school systems, the head of their board is the governor.
Are you hopeful that there will be movement or progress in that area?
I don't lean on hopeful. I think that there are enough people that are interested and concerned and dedicated to address it, that it will be addressed. To what measure and what level, I'm not sure.
Works. Well, there's clearly a lot to discuss and to continue this conversation. But Brandy, I want to really thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Hopefully, you can come back, as you discover more information, and as your research produces more. And obviously, we too are here as willing and able partners for the work you guys are doing. But thank you for all you're doing. It's required and needed given everything that we're looking at and tackling. As always, I want to thank my colleague and friend Alex for joining me. I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. Be on the lookout for future webinars, and I wish everybody a good day. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.